Welcome to week 6. This week we are looking at democracy and the process of democratization. The first thing we need to understand about democracy is that it's an ideal, and much like capitalism and a lot of other things, it does not exist in pure form in the real world. Democracy exists along a continuum, not really at the extreme end where everything is done, by democratic process. Countries that are designated as democratic have certain characteristics, such as respect for rule of law, limited government, political and civil rights, free and fair elections, things like that. But they don't necessarily have them in perfection. Okay. The text's authors make a distinction between procedural and substantive definitions of democracy, and that's a very important distinction. Procedural definitions, again, recognize that democracy is about process. In fact, you could make the argument. Democracy doesn't mean that the people rule, it means that the people deliberate. And it's all about how open the deliberative processes of a country are. Substantive definitions of democracy are much more focused on outcomes and argue that outcomes are as important as process. So countries that tolerate high levels of inequality, poverty, and that systematically discriminate against minorities really have little right to call themselves democratic. And this is where you see the distinction between liberal democracy and social democracy, with social democracy being much more interested in equality of outcomes, where liberal democracies are much more interested in equality of opportunity. Democratization refers to a process where a previously authoritarian regime makes a transition towards some kind of minimally democratic regime. The authors note, for example, in Chile over the last 15 years or so, or really since the turn of the 21st century, where after 17 years of dictatorship during the from the 1970s into the 1990s, Chile has now had a successful transition where they have competed, where a socialist and conservative political parties have competed, and where both parties have won, and where both parties, having lost, have been willing to relinquish power. And that is a vital feature when you're looking at democratization. Okay. The text also notes different types of democratic regimes, different pathways to democratization, and different theories explaining the causality of why countries move from authoritarianism in the direction of democratic governance. This week, our country to discuss in the forum is Mexico, which I think is a really good country to talk about when you're looking at democratization. The profile begins on page 499. Porfirio Diaz, the late 19th century Mexican president, was famously quoted as observing, "Pobre de Mexico, tan lejos de Dios y tan cerca de los Estados Unidos." So do any of you know Spanish and my butchered reversion of Spanish? Can you translate the quotation? If you can, what does it suggest about Mexico's history? Let's talk about that in the forum. This week we close Unit 1, which means that we have a 100-point examination on the material that is due. What is this? This is week 6. So we're looking at it being due on the 29th. So you have to have it done by midnight. It consists of multiple choice questions drawn from each chapter, each of the 6 chapters, that's worth a total of 30 points. And then a concept identification section covering all 6 chapters, again, worth 30 points. And then a short answer section covering all 6 chapters, worth 40 points. So hopefully everyone has been studying the material on a week-to-week basis, in which case the exam will be no big deal. If you do poorly on the exam, first of all, it's not the end of the world. You can still do fine in this class. But it should be an indication that you need to begin studying a lot more harder and more systematically. So let's have a great week.